If I had to put Plantasia into a few seconds, it is a cozy game with idle components developed for PC. It is a band on the bottom of your screen where you can grow plants that you can harvest resources. You can genetically splice seeds, looking for new plant variants and properties. You can decorate your space station with world and story related trinkets. The idea is that whether you're looking for the perfect plant, you're decorating your space, or saving the planet from total extinction, you feel like you belong. We are trying to give you respite from the mechanic day-to-day emotions that you're usually stuck on. The game is so unique. We have so many different things. The thing about the bottom third, the affixes, I am very much like a hardcore collector. I am the kind of guy who's not really satisfied when I find a game I like until I have like every achievement on it and I've done everything. I love seeing that 100% pop up on my screen. So it's just, I think the sheer amount of plants we have in this game is impressive. Like, even without talking about the affixes, because then we get that weird number we discussed the other day, which is like 5 billion combinations or something. 5 point something, 5.6, 5.7 billion combinations with all the affixes. If we're just talking sprites and colors, we have like such an impressive amount, and I am just really looking forward to seeing all of those play out. The art team has done an amazing job. They all look fantastic. Yeah, so I will probably be spending quite a bit of time in our game just trying to get every little plant unlocked and having like the sprite for all of them in the plant database. Yeah, that's just something I'm looking forward to. I am very excited about a lot of the stuff that we're putting into the game. The feature I am most excited about to see come to life is Bear. I think it's going to be really fun seeing as much as it is simple to an extent, I am looking forward to seeing personality system in Bear come to life. It is just a thing of like, as you talk to Bear, he's always going to give you about 3 options with different emotional responses. And the idea, once the system is complete, is that Bear will remember usually how you treat him and sort of try and match the energy, which also, allows for him to check, if you're always upbeat and then for some reason you're a little brooding, the system is going to pick up on that and be like, hey, are you okay? So that is something that in concept has been very fun to play with. I'm really excited to see if we can make it work in a way that feels cohesive and fun to the players. Game has a few characters. They are all under the umbrella of what everyone's going to come to know as Revive, which is essentially this hybrid government/research organization. They started as a branch of the government of what we know as the Americas, that eventually, as humanity unified under a single purpose due to a series of things that players will have to find out. And eventually, just because of their influence and because of how helpful they were to humanity at large, they sort of took over. From that, Revive has a council that is made of essentially the most well-renowned members of each department, which is the Revive Council. And each department has their own counselor. They are supposed to be somewhat neutral in the state of things and to, watch out for the organization at large, but of course they have ties to their home department. The main character of our game, the player's character, being from Growth, which is the department that takes care of plant life. They specifically grow and research the plant life for the planets that you're trying to restore. So the counselor for Growth is the one you're going to be in contact with. His name is Chimalli, which is a traditional Aztec shield. So I really wanted to make sure that we really honed in, as a counselor, as essentially the person who came from your department and has been there for a long time. He is supposed to be your guardian of sorts, which is also a double play, as the players will soon find out that not just is he the counselor, but he is also the player's father. And you have this interesting dynamic where he doesn't really play favorites because this is work, has a very strict code of conduct. He's all about work in that sense, where he doesn't really like mixing things. But at the same time, you have this sweet like moments where he won't let it interfere with work, but you can tell that he's really happy to see their kid there. He is this super easygoing, super like even humorous guy with a very strong sense of duty. He has been through a lot. If you engage in his dialogue, you're going to see that his family, your family at that point, has an interesting history with the events of the world at large. Another very important thing about him is that he is the inventor of the technology that essentially the restoration efforts are based off of. Every single seed that you get is stored on a piece of tech that's called a seed bank. The player's parents are the ones who ended up developing that through studying a very particular material that is something I'm going to talk about at a later date. So he is just this very central figure, not just to the game, but to the world. So another one of the characters that we have, now jumping departments, we've talked about growth, which is the central department for the game itself, as that's the department you're in. The very next department that you're going to bump into is most likely going to be Forge. So the idea behind Forge, as the name sort of implies, is that they deal a lot with like metal work and with just, they're kind of the counterpart from Growth, where Growth would deal with things that are very organic, and then Forge will deal a lot with like stone and metal and those different types of material. Your main point of contact for Forge, the person who has been assigned to the project that you're in, every Forge representative takes the title Forgesmith, and the one you're going to be interacting with in Plantasia is going to be Forgesmith by the name of Aislinn MacKenna. Kind of getting the Forge idea, that really blacksmith vibe. Aislinn is very Celtic inspired. It is just a thing of like drawing from anything that has like that vibe of just working with metal and like the intricacies of that craft with the Celtic inspiration. I really wanted to drive in this person who is like, they're very professional, but you can see that there's a fire burning in there, if that makes sense. It's one of those things of like, a lot of the times she's pretty serene and she really measures her interactions with others. You know, she knows she can be a little explosive, so she tries to keep it down at first. If she catches you questioning Forge or, you know, nitpicking the work from someone under her, or even her work herself, if you dare, wouldn't suggest it, she tends to get pretty fired up. She's very passionate about, there's a lot of pride that goes into her work. She's a little bit of a perfectionist. Think about that one character that just wants to make that one material perfect. So, you know, these long nights just hammering down to the forge. When I was writing her up, there was this one phrase that really stuck with me. You know, some writers will say that they can hear their characters talking to them from the page. And just as I was putting Aislinn together, there was just this mentality. One of the hooks that I wrote for her is this idea of like, a tool's only as strong as the hand that wields it. So mind your grip. She's probably one of the ones I'm most excited about. Another one of the characters that you're gonna be bumping into is the representative for a department called Vault. The idea behind Vault is that they essentially take care of the finances. Not necessarily just money, but just logistics and what goes where and who gets what. Especially within the game, mechanically speaking, a lot of times you're going to have a surplus of one material, but you're going to be needing another. And we have this cute little machine that we like to call the exchange system. And everyone's going to get to know that a little better once they get their hands on the game. But the exchange algorithm was essentially put together by Vault. More specifically by the character you're going to come to know as Quartermaster Bahati. So she is inspired by the culture of the Swahili coast. When I was trying to put together the character, it was this idea of like, I want to inspire myself with a culture that's known for its rich trade. Who can best take me to a place where I can put together a believable merchant? And the Swahili coast really got to me because you have this amazing cultural melting pot. All of this influence from the Middle East and from Asia. It was really this hub where you had the native people from Africa, but you had these people that came from Saudi Arabia, you had like the Persians, and you had all these merchants coming from India, and like trade was so rich over there. And I felt like it will also be really interesting for the art team because that joint culture that formed there, you know, you see a lot of pattern, a lot of color, you see all these super interesting things. So that felt like a super interesting culture to draw from. Essentially, the thing about Bahati is that much like the other characters, they're all pretty young. You're gonna learn as you go through that the project you're working on is pretty important. So they pulled essentially all the new and upcoming talent, who are a lot of young people who have been doing great things. And Bahati was the one who essentially optimized the exchange system. She is someone who comes from a family of traders. She's super balanced, super adaptable. The idea behind her is to make this person who's very calculated, but trying to avoid making her cold. I still want her to be this really interesting, really confident, really charming character. You know, she has to be a very good negotiator because she is dealing with people and with the exchange of things all the time. And she is this character who really puts a lot of value in building trust. One of the things that she is above all is fair. She wants to make sure that everyone gets what they're entitled to and that every trade really has value for both parties. And one of the things behind her is just this idea, it's something that supposedly she says a lot, which is that fairness is not weakness. It's the foundation of trust. And without trust, trade collapses. So it is just this thing of like she is trying to build a network that can stand the test of time. One of the other characters you're gonna bump into as you go through the game, they are from a department that we like to call Ranger. And that comes from the notion that they're sort of the boots on the ground when it comes to the planet effort. It is just a thing of like, sure, you're growing your cute little plants in a greenhouse and you're sending them down to the planet. But once they get there, someone has to do the work of putting them where they're supposed to go and making sure that they're healthy and essentially taking care of the whole endeavor planet side. And because of that, the representative for the Ranger department takes the name of Worldwarden. They are essentially this guardian of that side of the project. The character that will be taking that role in Plantasia, he goes by the name of Itagibá, which is a name that comes from a language of a native group from South America, the Tupi people, who are actually around the Amazon. They still live in an area that now belongs to Brazil. I grew up hearing about these people. I think they have a really rich culture, a really rich history. The name is actually drawn from an old Tupi legend, the legend that explains how diamonds came to be. Itagibá isn't the main character in the legend, his wife is. I really like that story. It is tragic, but it is quite beautiful. So I really wanted to draw something from it, and that's sort of how I came to that name. Because he is inspired by the Tupi culture, he has a very deep connection to the land. He has this sense of wanting to understand how every little part of the land is vital in keeping the balance of all things. There's just this deep connection to the natural world, which really plays into our solar punk side of Plantasia. He is very dutiful. He's very, very dedicated, and he's sort of stoic. You know, he's this very calm, composed person. It's that sort of guy that, you know, you get in a room with him and you're just kind of looking at him and be like, okay, I can get behind what this dude is doing. Very, very respectable person. And it's just a thing of like, the idea is that he commands respect, but it's not imposed. He's just such a passionate, correct person about his work that he just kind of inspires you to follow in his footsteps. He knows what his responsibilities are. He knows, especially as Worldwarden, what his station demands, but he has the humility to carry that without the need to bulldoze through his peers or, you know, his charge. I think the first time I ever picked up a video game, I was 3. And growing up in Brazil, a console was like a rare treat. It's not something that you bumped into a lot. When I was a kid, they were pretty expensive. Everything was imported. But one of my cousins had a Super Nintendo, and I was always at his house. I have too many memories of playing like Donkey Kong. And it wasn't until I was a little bit older, it's probably 10, 11, when I actually finally got a computer in my house. And on that, I had the first Age of Empires. Well, the first Age of Empires had this really neat thing that was a scenario creator. You could pick every unit, even like a couple of the ones you could only get with cheat codes, and you could mess with the terrain, and you could put buildings and walls and trees and everything. And I would stage these huge, huge battles. And I just come up with these stories in my head for those scenarios. And that was probably the first exposure I really had to some semblance of game dev. And that was just something I thought was a lot of fun. I probably spent more time in the scenario builder than I did with the actual game. Through for a long time, I actually still go back to the first Age of Empires from time to time. I like that game quite a bit. At one point, much like most of the people in the industry, it just clicked that like, someone had to put that together. And I was just like, you know what? I want to do that. It took a bit to get into that. That's a story for another day. I was forcing a different degree, getting a different diploma, and then the pandemic hit. One of those things I had to take a break from studying economics at the time. I was like, well, I need to find something to do until this kind of goes away. So I picked up a design degree that was 2 years long. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go back to what I was doing before. I finished that game design degree about a year and some ago. Yeah, it's been a year and a half. Finished that degree, started taking other courses online, and that's kind of how I got here. I mean, I think the big deal with Cave Bear and the big deal with Plantasia, when I first talked to Ayla when she first told me about her idea, and we started putting the studio together, it has always been about that. It was always about finding people who were still learning to do what they want to do and going from there. Plantasia is my first, like, fully hands-on experience putting a game together. I am learning everything, especially when it comes to narrative design. You can ask most people, it's just like they treat narrative design as if it's like the industry's best kept secret. People don't really share information. You're really kind of just stabbing in the dark most of the time. Thankfully, and with the help of Ayla and everybody else, I have been able to find people who are willing to share the experience and who are willing to share how they do stuff. But before that, narrative design just tends to be a little obscure at times. So really taking the time to put these things together, working with Tanner a lot of the time to try and really build that bridge that narrative design is supposed to between the story and the gameplay. That's all been a first with Plantasia. It really goes back to what we were trying to accomplish when we first put the studio together. One of the ways that we have talked about it before, and something that I've seen Ayla say more than once, Cave Bear Games was born out of stubbornness in a way. We were all trying to find work. We're all new, and the industry was just in a really, really rough spot. One of the big things is that on top of the pillars, on top of communication, on top of education, on top of passion, the series is really about action. No one would give us a job, so we made one. We want to make sure that regardless of what state the industry is in, we are moving. We are doing something. As with any crafter's profession, if you don't craft, you don't improve. And then again, as far as the pillars go, I was super into all 3 of them. Education obviously makes perfect sense because Ayla used to teach. That is something I take a lot of joy in. I like talking to people, and I like being able to help them to improve whatever it is they're trying to improve. Gosh, I have spent more hours than I'd like to admit at times. Oh, this person wants to figure out how to do this, or that person doesn't really know how to go about that. It's like, if I have that time, if I have that knowledge, I don't see why we shouldn't be sharing. That is something that I do hold pretty dear to me. Passion fuels any project. I think we can easily say that the team here is very passionate. You know, we're all very excited about the project. We're all just so into this. I mean, the multiple hour meetings are any indication of that. I feel like every other piece of conflict could have been avoided or fixed way faster if people would just talk more. My wife is also a comm major, so yeah, just communication is something that is constantly present in my life, whether I like it or not. I think I just can't stress how important that is. If I had to go back and tell myself one thing, it would be quit hyperfixating on the details. You know, a lot of times, especially with writing, you tend to get overly creative. And, you know, it's just one of those things of like, I remember trying to put together a timeline and try to make sure that the dates matched up and that things made sense. Really, like, of course, you want to make a coherent, cohesive story, but at the same time, it's just like there's no need to hyperfixate on it. It's just like if it's not completely perfect right off the bat, you have time for that. Of course, you want to make sure it's passable because you never know when someone might actually share something. Just because it's not necessarily meant for the public doesn't mean that the public will never get their hands on it. Yeah, it was just this thing of like, I remember spending a good chunk of time trying to make sure that a couple of the events on the world timeline lined up the way I wanted. And it's one of those things of like 5 years more, 5 years less would not have made a difference there. So I think, yeah, it would definitely be allow yourself to move on even when something's not perfect. There's always going to be some difficulty. There's always going to be some struggle, as dramatic as that sounds. Like I mentioned before, it's a crafter's profession. Don't be afraid to keep chipping the block, especially in the beginning of the project. I remember it was crazy because I'm trying to get these things together and I'm trying to write something that sounds nice and I'm trying to study at the same time. I did study game design, but narrative design is a whole different beast. Lots of reading, lots of reading. I still have a couple of books that I drag around with me. At the end of the day, gotta hustle.